I'm Mira, 27 now. Though some mornings the mirror still holds the frightened 10-year-old who once clutched a frayed piece of denim like a lifeline. I sew for a living, small custom orders, wedding gowns, the occasional costume. But the truth is that fabric stitched itself to my soul long before I knew what a seam allowance was. My story is hemmed in threads of grief and hope, and if you're willing, I'd like to unspool it for you. One memory, one stitch at a time. I was born in the narrow back room of my parents' tailoring shop in Ahmedabad, where bolts of bright cotton and raw silk formed walls more protective than any brick. My earliest lullaby was the rhythmic chuck-chuck of Abba's black iron singer treadle machine. Amma's voice would float above it, reciting couplets from old Urdu ghazals, while her fingers pleated fabric with the kind of patience you find only in people who have loved and lost too many times. I didn't know then that Amma had already buried 2 daughters, girls who never made it past infancy, girls I never met but still felt in the hush that settled over the house whenever Amma lit incense on their birthdays. I was the 3rd attempt at a miracle, and the fear of losing me stitched itself into every hug she gave, every extra spoon of ghee she sneaked into my dell. Abba was different. Where Amma was moonlight, soft and watchful, Abba was a monsoon gust. He loved loudly, laughed louder, and promised me the world for breakfast each morning. On slow business days, he'd lift me onto his lap, guide my small feet onto the treadle, and let me pretend I was sewing straight lines while the needle danced, dangerously close to my fingers. Fabric can't break if you honor its weave, he'd say. People are the same. I believed him. I believed everything he said till the day the shop went quiet. It was a July afternoon, softened by steady drizzle. I remember swinging, my legs under the cutting table while Abba argued with someone out front. A customer, I assumed, until the voices sharpened like freshly honed shears. I peeked through the curtain just in time to see a man shove Abba hard enough that he stumbled into a tower of neatly folded saris. The colors tumbled like spilled marbles. The stranger's voice was low and dangerous. "You think I don't know? You're hiding money from me?" Abba's reply came out a ragged whisper. "I swear on my children, there is no money left." More shoving, more fabric falling, and then the stranger's fist, fast, final, landing against Abba's ribs. Something inside him cracked. He coughed once, twice, and slumped. I ran before I could scream. Abba survived that day, but the shop never reopened. The man was a local moneylender who'd financed Abba's attempts to import fancy embroidery machines. The investment failed, debt climbed, and threats turned to blows. Abba withdrew from life like a needle broken off in thick cloth, visible but useless. Night after night I'd overhear him wheezing in the dark, Amma begging him to return to the hospital, and Abba sputtering that the shop had been his heart, and the world had torn it out. Grief is not a moment. It's mildew. It spreads in corners. You forget to check. Within months, the singer sat silent under a tarp. Amma sold her jewelry to keep us afloat. I quit school at 14 to work in a garment factory. Rows of sweating teenagers stitching labels into clothes we'd never afford. The machine's roar was deafening, but at least it drowned my thoughts. You can't measure time in calendar pages when each day feels exactly like the one before it. The years melted, I sent wages home, watched Abba grow frail, and stitched thousands of straight seams while my own life zigzagged unseen. Then one November evening, the factory supervisor called me over. "You're quick, kid," he grunted, flipping through order sheets. "We've got a special piece. Needs delicate hands. Metropolitan Fashions in Mumbai wants a runway sample done tonight." He pointed to a roll of pale blue chiffon so light it looked like bottled sky. I touched it, and something hummed in my chest. A sensation both fierce and familiar. I asked if I could take it home, finish overnight. To my surprise, he agreed. That night, while Abba slept and Amma soaked lentils, for morning, I spread the chiffon on our small dining table. I traced the pattern with chalk, then hesitated. The factory's style guidelines screamed in my head. Efficiency first, beauty second. But this fabric deserved more. I pinned, basted, and pressed until dawn, ignoring the needle bites on my fingers. When I slipped the finished dress onto Amma's old mannequin, the room filled with the quiet gasp of dreams waking up. At the delivery counter next day, a design assistant from Mumbai inspected my work. Her eyes widened. "Who stitched this?" I braced for reprimand, had I ruined the sample, but she said, "Our creative director will want to meet the seamstress." Her card landed in my palm like a ticket out of the factory. That's how I stepped into the corridors of Metropolitan Fashions, where the walls gleamed and people treated fabric the way priests treat relics. The creative director, Leah D'Souza, a Brooklyn-raised dynamo with silver hair and sneakers, studied me over half-moon glasses. "We pay by talent here, not by age," she said. "You have an eye. Stay if you dare." I dared. Weeks blurred into months of night shifts in Mumbai hostels, days bursting with color swatches, silhouettes, and design critiques sharp enough to slice ego. My first big assignment was to embroider a limited edition sari line. I stitched until my back howled, but watching those saris glide down the Lakme runway was like hearing my own heartbeat amplified. Money flowed home. Abba's medicine improved. Amma smiled more. Yet success burns as it blesses. Colleagues sized me up. Village girl, threadbare Hindi, walking miracle or walking threat. During fittings they'd whisper, "Country talent, cheap labor and fancy, wrapping." Their needles pricked my pride, but I kept sewing. I had no room to break. And then came the call. Abba had collapsed. Kidneys failing, lungs weak, internal scars never healed from the moneylender's beating. He died before I caught the overnight train. I remember the funeral fire. It crackled loud enough to drown every apology I never voiced. In that molten light, I saw each moment I'd been absent. Birthdays missed, medicines delayed, hugs replaced by wire transfers, and grief stabbed deeper than poverty ever had. After the ashes cooled, Amma pressed Abba's tarnished measuring tape into my palm. "He would want you to keep creating," she whispered. He believed fabric could mend hearts. I quit Metropolitan. That surprised everyone, especially Leah. "You're on the brink of a global career," she argued. But I could no longer chase applause in places Abba would never see. I moved back, turned our shuttered storefront into a studio and named it Stitched with Tears, a promise that sorrow could become art. Running a shop is different from sewing for someone else. You must court clients, price emotions, and smile, even when the electricity cuts out mid-hem. The first year we barely scraped by. But word traveled. I wasn't just altering garments. I was altering stories. One afternoon, a bride-to-be came clutching her late mother's sari, sun-faded, torn at the pleats. She asked if I could transform it into a lehenga for her sangeet. As I worked, I found myself muttering Abba's mantra, honor the weave. With each hand-embroidered marigold motif, I pictured the mother spinning with her daughter on wedding day. When the bride returned to pick it up, she cried, and I realized these were the first tears in months that felt cleansing, not corrosive. Orders multiplied. A widower wanting his wife's shawl turned into cushion covers so he could lean on their love. A teen transitioning genders hoping to rework a childhood kurta into a jacket that matched the boy he now recognized in the mirror. My shop became confession booth and laboratory, each commission a testament that fabric, like life, could be reborn. But business growth exposed seams in my own heart. I rarely slept. I snapped at Amma. The moneylender's son appeared one day, offering a partnership that reeked of the past. Fear returned, prickling under my skin like loose threads. One night after closing, I slumped on the floor, surrounded by half-finished garments. My tears spotted the velvet I'd been beating. I heard echoes of factory machines, of Abba gasping, of design room rivalries. Success felt like an ill-fitting bodice. I wanted to run, yet roots held me. That's when I saw the old singer in a corner, rust-patched but intact. I hadn't touched it since Abba's last lesson. Dust coated its curves like sorrow left unspoken. I hauled it onto my workbench, oiled its joints, replaced the belt, and fed a scrap of muslin under the presser foot. The needle dipped, rose, dipped, steady as breathing. The stitch line wavered, then straightened, and I cried again. But these tears carried something lighter, relief maybe, or forgiveness. Word traveled about the antique machine revival, and a journalist from the Textile Chronicle requested an interview. I almost declined. Publicity invited scrutiny, and scrutiny could wake old debts. But Leah, ever my reluctant fairy godmother, texted, "Own your narrative. Don't let others sew it for you." So I spoke. I told them about Abba's beating, the debt, the factory, Mumbai, the brides, the widower. I even admitted my worst fear, that I was stitching stories for everyone except myself, patching their lives while mine frayed. The article went global. Emails flooded in. Orders, donations for small-town artisans, letters from girls in factories who saw in my story a crack of daylight. We expanded, training 8 young women from the same factory I once escaped. They learned about French, seams and living wages, about how every garment carries history stitched into its lining. Yet growth did not silence grief. On the first death anniversary, I closed the shop early. Amma and I sat by the river where mourners sent lamps afloat. She produced a parcel wrapped in muslin, Abba's cotton kurta, stained at the collar. "He wore it the day you were born," she said. "I couldn't burn it." My fingers traced the faded pinstripes. A plan bloomed, an idea as audacious as love. I spent weeks unpicking the kurta, salvaging each intact piece, then appliquing them onto a canvas of midnight blue silk. I embroidered Urdu couplets in gold thread, lines Amma had once sung. The final piece was a wall hanging, 6 feet tall, meant for the shop's entrance. I titled it Heartbeat. When we unveiled it, customers fell silent. Some whispered prayers, others simply reached out to touch the stitches. They didn't need to know every story. The fabric spoke its own language. Last month, Stitched with Tears celebrated its 5th anniversary. We now ship worldwide, collaborate, with runway designers who credit each artisan by name, and run workshops that teach children to mend their clothes instead of discarding them. But numbers and accolades no longer thrill me the way they once did. What matters is the quiet moment after closing when the shop smells of steam and sandalwood, when I roll Abba's measuring tape across new fabric and hear his laugh in the clink of metal against wood. Or mornings when factory escapee-turned manager Parul adjusts her glasses and announces, "Mira, we're booked till October. Again." And I grin, because her salary now pays her brother's college fees. Sometimes, a customer asks how the shop got its name. I smile and say, because every life is a tear-stained fabric. But with the right thread, tears can become the strongest part of the weave. I still cry occasionally, when a widow presses the last button of her husband's sherwani into my palm, or when a child in patched trousers hugs me after learning their first running stitch. The tears don't scare me anymore. They're water to thirsty cloth, swelling the fibers so the needle glides smoother. If you visit the shop, you'll find a sign over the door. Enter frayed, leave sewn. It's not just a slogan. It's a promise first whispered by a father to a daughter beneath the whir of an old singer. I keep that promise, one stitch at a time. And on nights when the city sleeps and only stray dogs roam the alley, I sometimes talk to Abba, tell him about the clients, about how I finally forgave the man who broke him, yes, even that, about how Amma laughs louder these days. I tell him I am still the girl who once tried to sew straight lines with crooked hands, still learning, still mending. Mostly I tell him that the world did not tear us apart. It simply gave us new seams to follow. He doesn't answer, at least, not aloud, but in the hush that follows, I hear the singer's rhythm, steady as a heartbeat, reminding me why I began and why I must continue, because love, stitched with tears, will always hold. A story of fabric and family, of a little girl who once believed she was too broken to matter, now finding strength in every thread she stitches. My name is Mira, and I'm still sewing, still healing, still dreaming. Maybe you too are carrying something heavy, a memory, a regret, a goodbye never said. I hope Stitched with Tears reminded you that healing isn't always loud. It's quiet, patient, and stitched together with love, even when it hurts. Thank you for being part of this journey with me. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel, My English Storybook. We'll be back soon with another emotional story. Until then, take care and keep believing in the beauty of your own story.